What's a scary science fact that the public knows nothing about? If your dog swims in a lake after receiving a spot on flea treatment, it absolutely decimates the invertebrate population. A large dog swimming in 8 Olympic swimming pools worth of water soon after treatment will leach enough neurotoxin to end 50% of the lake's invertebrate population within 48 hours. I say after, I mean relatively soon after, within, say, a day, to have an effect quite this devastating. The leaching does reduce over the month, but it's still there, and the effect of multiple dogs still allows for a terrible buildup of chemicals. Yeah, so someone needs to make a horror movie where the monster is just a really happy dog swimming in a lake, something like Cujo, but not that scary. Story 2. I live in the Philippines, a country who suffered terribly under Japanese occupation. Aside from the war being taught through primary to high schools, almost every other family has grandparents who can vividly recall the cruelty of the Japanese occupation. The trauma runs deep. It's never forgotten here in the Philippines. Story 3. I learned about Ton 618 the other day. My facts here may be mildly incorrect. Feel free to Google. It's a black hole about 10.3 billion light years away, but we can still detect the massive amount of light bending around it. It's so large, they had to make a new category of black hole for it called ultra-massive black holes. It's believed to be the largest thing in the universe. Its diameter is 14 times the diameter of Neptune's orbit, so it could fit our entire solar system in it 14 times across, side to side. If the black hole replaced our sun, we would be deleted. If it replaced the black hole that is currently at the center of the Milky Way, within 120 years, the Milky Way would be deleted. This black hole doesn't swallow planets, it swallows entire galaxies. The idea of this thing freaks me the heck out. Story 4. Heart muscle cells don't reproduce much in adults, roughly 1% per year. If you have an infarction or other stressor that ends those cells, then your heart won't be able to grow new cells to replace the other ones. This is why patients with diseases like heart failure end up needing a heart transplant. Trying to get this process to happen is a major goal for many cardiac researchers. Story 5. The human body temperature in developed countries is actually declining, and at the same time, global warming is increasing the temperature threshold for many fungus types. This is leading to a whole new medical issue of fungus infecting humans, and its main source of protection, body temperature, is no longer working. That body temperature is a large reason for the success of mammals all over the world. After the KT extinction, the sun was blocked and cold species couldn't raise their body temperature to end infections in their bodies. There is ample evidence that after KT, that fungus spread all over the world in massive quantities, which leads many to believe this led to the ascendancy of mammals on Earth. Story 6. The youngest persons who developed Alzheimer's were around 25 years old. One lady got diagnosed with it at 31 while pregnant. By the way, when you get the disease at like 65, it doesn't suddenly begin. It's been creeping up and ravaging your brain for at least 20 years, if not more. You just didn't realize it because our brain is very good at compensating damages until, well, it cannot. Basically, the day you lose yourself in the supermarket, it's too late. Your brain is mostly mush and there is so far nothing you can do. That means that if you are 40 to 60 years old and reading this, chances are that some of you already started to experience the onset of Alzheimer's brain degeneration. It's just not advanced enough for you to realize it. Have a nice day. Story 7. Late to the party, but here goes. There are weaponized strains of anthrax which can remain viable and dangerous for 40-plus years after release. In 1942, the UK tested an anthrax bomb on Greenard Island, ending a flock of sheep in days, some passed in hours. Examinations showed that these spores could remain active for decades, and decontamination proved impossible at the time. The project was scrapped. Fast forward to 1981, an eco-terrorist group smuggled a sample off of the island and threatened the UK government with releasing it if the island wasn't decontaminated. The spores were still active and dangerous. It took 4 years to plan and execute the cleanup, using 280 tons of formaldehyde in a seawater solution and removing 7 hectares worth of soil to a depth of 3 feet, about 58,000 tons of topsoil, but the concentration was just too high for the Jews to do the job. The island was confirmed clean in 1990, 4 years after cleanup began. Story 8. Reverting global warming does not unmelt the South Pole. Antarctica is a giant ice mountain, the size of the US plus Canada, average about 1 kilometer thick, on top of land that is studded by plates of ice in the sea. Think of a very slow-moving pudding held in place by a little edge. All the modeling suggests that once you lose those plates, eventually all the ice will slide into the water. To refreeze the plates once they are gone, you need an ice age of about -2 degrees Celsius to pre-industrial or -3 degrees Celsius to current. There is a 70-meter sea level rise of ice on the South Pole. The models swing widely on how long it takes to melt on a bunch of factors, but it could be less than 2 centuries for the first 10 meters. So either we geoengineer to cool at least the South Pole by a tremendous amount, or to hold the ice in place, or in time, all coastal regions are lost. The plates are still in place, but the warmest one is showing signs of stress and thinning. It is linked to 7 meters of sea level rise if it fails. To me, this is more threatening than any other climate change catastrophe. Story 9. A CME, a coronal mass ejection, is the most likely civilization-ending disaster to come from space. The sun emits them regularly, and they hit the Earth every few hundred years. The last one occurred in the 1890s, but society at the time was less susceptible to the effects. Were one to hit the Earth today, it would basically destroy all the tech infrastructure on whichever side of the planet is facing the sun at the time. This would knock the affected hemisphere back into the stupid ages, and it would take decades to recover, altering the global balance of power forever. It's only a matter of time. We could mitigate the effects, but it would be too expensive, so we haven't and likely never will. At least not until the problem becomes real to people, but then it will be too late. This is a much more likely scenario than an asteroid impact. Story 10. Airplanes are dynamically stable, but helicopters are dynamically unstable. That means if an airplane pilot lets go of the controls of a small plane with no autopilot, it's correctly trimmed and balanced, it will keep flying level until it runs out of fuel. If a helicopter pilot lets go of the controls in about 2.4 seconds, it will tip over to such a degree that it is unrecoverable. We can let go of one control, the collective, for a little while by frictioning it in place to change the radio, adjust something, scratch our nose, or whatever. But it's friction on, do the thing with the left hand, friction off, and hand back on the collective. We fly 3 seconds away from falling out of the sky all the time. But then that's also kind of the same for bicycles, although they can only tip left and right, not every direction. Subconsciously, you are always adjusting your weight and controlling the steering to stay upright. Same thing in a heli. You balance on a column of air and you keep balancing the whole time just like on a bike. You don't even notice it, you just do it. Story 11. In the rainforest, there are around 1,000 unique species per 1 square kilometer. Each of these species, especially plants, can potentially offer new therapeutics such as antibiotics that no bacteria has developed resistance to. Any species can produce unique protein molecules that will never be replicated short of some kind of AI with near infinite computing power that we could use for a large variety of therapeutics. These species will never evolve again. We have lost 820,000 square kilometers of just the Amazon rainforest since 1970, meaning we have likely lost around 820 million species and exponentially more than that in potential therapeutics. Story 12. This one is more of a theory than a fact, but it's terrifying nonetheless. Boltzmann brains. So, what is a Boltzmann brain, you might ask? Well, given an infinite amount of time, anything and everything that might be possible, no matter how unlikely, can and will happen, including the random emergence of a consciousness from a series of fluctuations in the void. This consciousness is a Boltzmann brain. Perhaps I and my consciousness are one of these occurrences that has happened long after the passing of the very last star and the evaporation of black holes in the dark, cold universe of the far, far future. Perhaps everything I'm experiencing is either the pure imagination of or some mad fever dream of this Boltzmann brain, as a way to cope with the never-ending darkness, and even more terrifyingly, maybe I, the Boltzmann brain, will suddenly awake at any minute and all of this will be gone in an instant. And finally, as a cherry on the top of existential dread, if the base human species has a limited run, then only a limited number of humans will ever live, let alone those who experience a life in the 21st century with experiences such as writing Reddit comments like these. However, with infinite time, not only could Boltzmann brains emerge, but if they can, then with infinite time, an infinite number of Boltzmann brains will emerge. This means that, according to simple statistics, you have a much higher chance of being a Boltzmann brain than an actual human being with a consciousness. Story 13. Always have probiotics when you're prescribed antibiotics. If you don't, the antibiotics will clean your gut out of the healthy bacteria that's in it and cause all kinds of nasty digestive problems in the future. For real, I have IBS, something fierce, because I was constantly prescribed antibiotics for ear infections as a kid and was never told to eat yogurt or probiotics. Story 14. We can only see so much of the light spectrum. We can only hear so many sound frequencies. Evolutionarily, if something doesn't eat you and you don't eat it, you have no reason to need to perceive it. Really makes you think about the stuff we can't know. Story 15. Global ecological collapse is not just coming, but it is an inevitability. In 1972, MIT did a series of models. The one our global trends fit closest to is the business as usual Model 2, which predicts that by 2100, global population will drop to where it was in 1900, a drop of approximately 6 billion. This isn't something that can be solved by lowering carbon emissions via switching to other energy sources, because while climate change is an aspect of ecological collapse, a larger problem is from the scale of industrial extraction and manufacturing. The changes in global society required to forestall the crisis are so large and contrary to what we're currently doing that they're essentially an impossibility. Those under 30 will live to see mass passing on a scale never before known in human history. Story 16. Prion diseases are terrifying. Mad cow, scrapie for sheep, chronic wasting disease in deer or elk, spongiform encephalopathy in any creature are the same as CJD or kuru in humans. Also, all the animal versions can be transmitted to people if eaten. Damaged prions cannot be cooked out. Kuru was discovered among those who ate their recently deceased to honor them. Eating someone with Alzheimer's or dementia could lead to CJD. Kuru makes people into a version of a zombie. You slowly go mad, losing your mind, and are prone to violent outbursts. It's always fatal, most people lasting between 6 months and 2 years. Also, prions can lay dormant for years and still be passed on. A sheep with scrapie can be wounded on some grass, and a year later, a different sheep can eat that grass and catch the disease. If prion diseases ever become more easily transmitted or widespread, we are all screwed. Story 17. Strange matter. It's a theoretical kind of exotic quark matter theorized to be produced by high-energy particle collisions such as in cosmic rays. The ones produced naturally this way are thought to zip clean through the Earth and out the other side all the time without interacting with any matter, because they're positively charged and are repelled by atomic nuclei. However, there's a worry that strange matter produced in a particle collider in a negatively charged state would interact with an atom before it had time to decay to its ground state as in naturally occurring ones. Should this happen, it would convert the matter into strange matter and the matter around it and the matter around that. This chain reaction would continue until the entire planet and all matter on it was converted to a sphere of strange matter. Even the naturally occurring ones passing through us aren't entirely free of risk, and some scenarios regarding their energy and stability could allow them to get lucky and strike an atom on its way through the planet. Story 18. Pretty much every piece of software behind every service you use day to day is a terrifying knot of hacks, workarounds, and good enoughs that by all rights should never have seen the light of day. Your money is tied up in a banking computer system written in a language that isn't taught in universities anymore and has to be taught by the current developers to the next generation. Every time someone quits a banking software job without notice, there is a loss of knowledge that can barely be recovered from. Nobody can upgrade it because all the banks have to be able to talk to one another. If every system admin went on break at the same time, they'd reach a coffee shop just in time to discover that the tills aren't working and their Uber driver didn't get paid for the trip. And by the time they got back, sans coffee and on foot, society would be well on the way to total collapse. Okay, so basically the internet is held together by digital duct tape and the panic whispers of sleep-deprived sysadmins. All right, got it. Story 19. Head engineer and burners and flame stuff. An IEC specification for plane safety and electrical specification mess up a technical part where it says to use asbestos for calibration. 2004, it says use aluminum instead of asbestos because asbestos is cancerous now. The industry has gone completely to aluminum. But it's the only thing that changed in the IEC spec. Aluminum and asbestos are like on the opposite side of scale of heat transfer coefficient. So in order to pass the test, we calibrate with something that is 10x magnitude different in heat transfer capacity, meaning we rate the flame at a much lower capacity because the heat transfers so fast. AL equals 232 Wm over K and asbestos equals 0.15 minus 2 Wm over K. We would have needed a more powerful torch to hit it with asbestos. Well, honestly, I decay because that was before my time, but I can read a chart and 230 is quite far from 2 Wm over K, meaning the electrical cables will fail faster than they should under flame, high temperature setting, or even voltage and high temp settings where these cables should last and last for minutes, providing the correct voltage. Every single electrical wire in a plane will fail the test if the testing cable was done after the change, 2004, I think. Runner up because it's not scary. When you buy grilled chicken already made in stores, those lines from the grill are put on by a roller, the chicken is cooked using infrared burners, and the roller is heated to add lines after the chicken is cooked to make it appear as if it's been grilled. Story 20. Oh, I can talk about my favorite field, if anyone ever reads this. So you know the whole nature versus nurture thing? Epigenetics is a field of biology that studies how your gene expression changes short of changing the genetic code itself. When I say almost anything can change your gene expression, I mean it. What does this mean? Well, whole or parts of genes can be activated and deactivated. This is how cell differentiation works, at different points by different factors, even up to the end of your life. This is why identical twins start to look different as they age, or they can at least. So when I say that everything you do has an impact on your life, I freaking mean it. The emotions and feelings you go through, the food you eat, even crap your mother did before you were born, I could go on. So be careful what you do because you have no idea how you'll turn out. Luckily, unlike gene editing, epigenetic edits are more easily reversible. Story 21. Scary, not scary science fact. Most science facts assume the worst case scenario regardless of how likely it is to happen. For example, do grapefruits mess with your medication? Well, it depends on which medication and what amount of grapefruit juice. For some medications, it'll probably won't do too much. For others, it'll do a lot. For some of you, need to drink a lot of it or drink it often. For some, not so much. Or take anthrax, as in, should you be worried about anthrax spores? Well, it depends on where you live and what your profession is. You can very much get anthrax in many parts of the world now, working in a farm, for example, and no one seems to be calling on the FBI out of fear for it. Or 1 in 3 people will get cancer. Well, yeah, but you get those numbers nowadays because it's more likely that you will live long enough that cancer will be your most likely cause of passing, and not something like appendicitis or whatever it was that ended most people centuries ago. Not to say you shouldn't worry a bit by those things, but a lot of science facts you see around online don't really provide much context in exchange of the clicks. Story 22. The oceans are turning into acid. Within the climate change discussion, anti-environment individuals have successfully politicized this fact such that a bunch of people don't understand what it is and think it's not real, and then make up all sorts of nonsense about little ice ages and natural cycles and so on. Obviously, climate change is real. This is proven fact. We know this, but the well has been poisoned enough by polluting entities and the far right that people are writing off temperature change as if it's not actually happening. But climate change isn't just temperature change, it's all sorts of other things, as well as those other things that don't get nearly enough coverage. And one of those things is ocean acidification. When CO2 mixes with water, it turns into carbonic acid. Because of the massive surface area of the ocean, which contacts the air, there's a lot of mixing between the two. So gradually, as you have more CO2 in the air, the pH level of the ocean drops. And yes, this has been measured and it fits within the upper bound of predictive models, just as has been the case with global temperatures, to be clear. As the pH level of the ocean drops, you have a lot of organisms that get affected by this. Shellfish, corals, and plankton populations are affected by this, and this is important because there are food sources for everything in the ocean. And the ocean, being 3/4 of the Earth's surface, is a food source for everyone on land too. I think a lot of the public does know the term climate change, but doesn't know all the specific effects of it, and how it's a lot more than, it'll be a bit warmer. This is disastrous stuff, and people are not reacting with nearly enough urgency. Story 23. The same person that helps feed half the world's population through modern-day nitrogen fertilizers was also the father of chemical warfare, Fritz Haber. He was literally an evil genius that worked to develop weapons to inflict as much damage as possible. He originally developed a gas with bromine, but troops passed away so quickly the others had time to flee, so he switched to chlorine, so that by the time symptoms developed, you were already exposed in the back ranks. He used live test subjects by the hundreds. He also drove his wife to end it all, often flew to the front lines to witness the chemicals end, and his institute gave us cyanide gas. Story 24. There's an amoeba called Naegleria fowleri that lives in shower water, tap water, AC, springs, and lakes that can crawl into your sinus and then travel upwards slowly until it carves its way into your brain if you do not have a strong enough immune response. The water needs to be sprayed inside of the nose and can be quite forceful, and it can't be from a small amount like mist or a droplet because the amoeba is too heavy to travel that way, and one amoeba won't make it. If you get the infection, it's 99% fatal. There have been 2 survivors. One was a normal child, the other is now a mentally deficient man in his 40s. Its closest cousin, a amoeba, lives in construction dust, dirt, ground dust, sand, mud, your floor where you walk in extremely shallow water, and is 100% fatal. It can also cause non-specific pink eye and eye infections that progress into the brain. Story 25. Fans and sweating use evaporation and convection to cool our body when it is hot. But if it is more humid, it doesn't work as well because the sweat won't evaporate. And when it is hotter, convection doesn't work as well since your body is just averaging out to a hot environment. So we have a metric called the wet bulb temperature, which is basically what the temperature equivalent is if it were 100% humid, no evaporation. The highest recorded wet bulb temp was 36.3 degrees Celsius. Although with global warming, this is becoming much more common. Why is this scary? The maximum WB temperature that a human can survive is 35 degrees Celsius. Below this, you can use fans, a damp cloth, drink lots of water, stay in the shade, and sweat like crazy. Your body will shunt heat away from your organs and brain to the extremities to protect itself. As temps get closer to 35, though, it will give up on your organs and only try to keep your brain cool. And then at 35, it simply cannot manage anymore. You will have a heat stroke and the equivalent of a high-grade fever. You will have massive organ failure, you'll get brain damage, and then pass away. And there's nothing you can do about it. If you're on a bus and the AC turns off or the engine fails, rolling down the windows won't help, fans won't help. You need to immediately exit the bus into a building with AC, or everyone on the bus will get heat stroke in a few minutes, need hospitalization a few minutes after that, and pass away half an hour later if untreated. If the power goes out in the city because everyone is using the AC, basically everyone in the city will pass away. The only hope is that your house is well insulated enough or you have enough ice in your freezer to keep you alive until the power returns. In the next 20 years, these temps may be reached by dozens of cities with tens of millions of inhabitants. Story 26. H2S or hydrogen sulfide is commonly found in swamps or our wastewater collection system. It is defined as the rotten egg smell you notice all over the place. This gas gets consumed by naturally occurring bacteria and become a slime layer of sulfuric acid, coating our sewer lines, and this destroys our infrastructure and causes collapses, often right in the middle of busy roads where vehicles fall into a quote-unquote sinkhole of poo water. Not only that, H2S at only 500 parts per million, 500 over 1 million, is lethal. The gas paralyzes your olfactory nerve ability to detect a smell, and then shuts off your brain's ability to control your lungs, causing you to suffer unless someone is at hand to breathe for you. This happens all the time with municipal workers in enclosed spaces. One guy will see his buddy collapse in a hole and decide to go down and get him, only to collapse immediately himself. Story 27. There was a massive solar storm in 2012 that missed the Earth by around 25 days. It was described as a Carrington-class event, and had it hit Earth head-on, it would have fried anything running on electricity and would have thrown us back to the Stone Age. In June 2013, a joint venture from researchers at Lloyd's of London and Atmospheric and Environmental Research, AER, in the United States, used data from the Carrington event to estimate the cost of a similar event in the present to the US alone at about $0.6 to $2.6 trillion, which at the time equated to roughly 3.6 to 15.5% of annual GDP. According to NASA, analysts believe that a direct hit by an extreme CME, such as the one that missed Earth in July 2012, could cause widespread power blackouts, disabling everything that plugs into a wall socket. Most people wouldn't even be able to flush their toilet because urban water supplies largely rely on electric pumps. And the reason why we know so much about it was because the storm hit the Stereo A solar observatory, which survived because it was specifically designed to survive a solar storm. So unless your electrical supply is as well protected as a literal solar satellite, you're out of luck. The upshot is that you'd be able to see the aurora pretty much wherever you are in the world, so there's that. Story 28. Not sure if this counts since it's a theory, but according to the bicameral mind theory, humans used to hear voices in their heads that became known as gods that formed the social fabric that held societies together, such as the ancient Egyptian and Mediterranean civilizations. Everyone was what we'd call nowadays schizophrenic. Then around 1500 BC, there was a lot of social upheaval, and these civilizations fell apart, and the gods abandoned humans and changed our consciousness to what we have today. The Old Testament versus New Testament is a chronicle of this change of consciousness from schizophrenic to conscious, aka polytheism, many gods, to monotheism, one God, aka that voice we hear in our heads nowadays. We still have vestiges of this today in the form of schizophrenics, hypnotism, and religious experiences that can be triggered by sending impulses to the brain and using substances. Story 29. I feel like this is definitely not a known fact outside of the medical field, but here's one. Bed sores aren't like little scabs or rashes. That's what I thought before entering the medical field. Bed sores are horrific wounds that open on the body when it's been in one position for too long. That area gets moist and the pressure from being on that area eats away and will open a giant crater wound and is incredibly hard to close and heal. I remember seeing an unstageable wound on a nursing home patient that had a stroke, wasn't being cleaned properly, and wasn't being turned or positioned every so often like he should have been. While being in that position ate away and were completely exposed and even black in some spots. It's probably one of the cruelest things I've ever seen. Also, this doesn't take very long to happen either. Just a week or so, the pressure plus moisture pulse bacteria, and boom, new bed sore. Also, even if they manage to close it, it's not considered healed until it stays like that for a year, because that spot is considered a danger zone, meaning that spot can open back up way easier than before. Story 30. The Edgewood Arsenal human experiments would be my contender. From 1948 to 1975, 7,000 U.S. military personnel and 1,000 U.S. civilians at Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, were subjected to experiments using over 250 different chemical agents, including anticholinesterase nerve agents, VX and sarin, and common organophosphorus, OP, and carbamate pesticides, mustard agents, nerve agent antidotes, including atropine and scopolamine, nerve agent reactivators, for example, the common OP antidote 2-PAM chloride, psychoactive agents, including BZ, irritants and riot control agents, alcohol, and caffeine. Nerve agents, organophosphates, are horrendous chemical weapons that induce full-body convulsions and loss of bodily functions, and ultimately passing away by inability to breathe due to constant contraction of the diaphragm. Mustard agents cause extreme chemical burns upon contact with the skin that can be life-threatening when inhaled. BZ is a psychoactive weapon of particular notoriety as it was the inspiration for the 1990 film Jacob's Ladder. BZ is properly known as 3-quinaclidinyl benzylate, is a potent anticholinergic deliriant medicine that induces effects mimicking Datura stratymonium poisoning with a total duration of about 70 to 80 hours. So essentially, the poisoned individual would be trapped in a living nightmare and completely mentally incapacitated with no sense of identity or ability to speak coherently for almost 3.5 days. Story 31. It is likely that sometime in the next few decades, a massive solar flare will hit Earth. It's a really question of when, not if. A flare big enough would destroy the electrical infrastructure across a large swath of the world. It would be months before power would be restored because we don't have the manufacturing capacity to essentially rebuild all of Earth's transformers at once. This is something we could harden the grid against, but there's zero political will to do it because it could happen in 100 years, 50 years, or tomorrow. We're heading into a time of higher solar activity now. Everyone, hold your breath. Story 32. There's a medical condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that causes all your joints to dislocate and your skin to be stretchy. EDS is a genetic disorder that causes the collagen, the glue that holds your body together, to either be faulty or not produce enough. There's 14 known types of EDS that each affect the patient differently. As I said in the beginning, it meant that any of your joints can be subluxed or dislocated very easily, but can also cause the internal to stretch, deform, tear, or move around. Veins can stretch and tear easily, and skin is usually, but not always, stretchy, velvety, shiny, prone to bruising and scarring. There's loads more, and it's an interesting topic to Google. For me personally, it affects my jaw, neck, shoulders, wrists, left ring and index finger, right thumb index and pinky finger, ribs, lower back, hips, knees, ankles, and big and index toes. My skin isn't stretchy, but it is very soft and shiny. I struggle to swallow food as the roof of my mouth is soft, so food often goes up into my nose. I have digestive issues that cause me to throw up day-old undigested food. I also have some pressure issues, but that may be caused by POTS, a separate condition, but is very common for people with EDS to also have POTS. Anyway, Google it. It's cool and gross, and it's ruined my life, so why not be fascinated with it? Story 33. Maybe the solution to the Fermi paradox, why we haven't detected any signs of intelligent life, is the dark forest theory, which assumes that all intelligent life is purposely hiding or concealing themselves for survival reasons. We cannot assume the intentions of intelligent life are good, and in fact, in DFT, that is only bad. Basically, the only intelligent life forms that survive are those which make themselves undetectable to avoid annihilation by assumed other intelligent life forms or rogue, terrorist, pirate organizations of said intelligent life forms. Announcing yourself or even failing to conceal yourself from any suspicion is tantamount to inviting a planet-wide invasion from an intelligent alien race, including the mass suppression of all life on your planet. Dark forest theory assumes that a hostile alien race will open fire with everything they have in their arsenal. I read the original theory on this, and it is insane how the author wrote it. Basically, all civilizations are crouching in a dark forest, hiding, lying in wait to mass at each other. We've made efforts to announce ourselves. Maybe an intelligent race is on its way to exterminate us now or laser us from afar with gamma rays. Story 34. I don't think I've seen anyone comment this yet, but if you have, sorry about that. But the rare occurrence of people getting bit by their cat or dog and contracting capnocytophaga bacterium, it's commonly found in the mouths of humans, cats, and dogs. They can sometimes, in my understanding, rarely cause these widespread, extremely dangerous infections under the right conditions, such as in a person with a weakened immune system. It can cause septicemia, endocarditis, abscesses, etc. In some extreme cases, it can lead to full-blown septicemia within hours or a couple of days and then lead to amputations, etc. Story 35. Plastics are causing infertility in humans and animals. Phthalates are one of many commonly used chemicals in plastics, which leach into the environment. And when they get ingested by pregnant women, it changes the development of the fetus. These changes in development affect fertility, and so far, this chemical is the only thing capable of explaining the 1% decrease in fertility per year. Now, 1% might not sound like a lot, but we have actually been producing these plastics for years and are on track to seeing a major infertility crisis across many different species, including our own, by 2045. The good news? Well, we can fix this problem quickly since these chemicals leave our systems rapidly, meaning that if we completely eliminate these phthalate-containing plastics from our lives, we could return to normal fertility rates after a few generations. Unfortunately, for the other species who will live with these plastics for much longer due to pollution, they're simply screwed. We will likely see many mass extinctions near the end of the century due to a combination of this, climate change, and probably several other factors. Story 36. Small differences in early, like 5-year-old education lead to huge differences in adult performance, as evidenced by the research on the Perry program, Heckman 2006, Heckman et al. 2013, etc., Progressa, Parker, and Turiel 2005, and so on. Most people chalk it up to IQ, but in fact, the differences in IQ from early education programs are insignificant, while the social skills, emotional support, and other soft skills make the impact so big. The terrifying fact is that you basically can't reverse it. If you had bad early education, or even worse, a toxic environment on early emotional development, you're starting way behind. Story 37. Astronomers have detected objects moving towards the edge of the observable universe in a way that suggests there is some kind of mass so large that it is pulling millions of galaxies towards our cosmos borders at hundreds of kilometers per second. On a related note, the largest structures in the universe are massive holes in the galactic filaments called voids. The largest of these is the Boots void, which is 330 million light-years in diameter, or roughly 0.3% the diameter of the entire universe, and is 236,000 megaparsecs in volume. It has an average density of 0.03% what normal space would have. There are only 60 galaxies in its entire volume, where astronomers would expect 2,000. Story 38. The Fermi paradox discusses how there are so many stars that life and intelligent life should have occurred somewhere, yet according to what we know, space seems empty and silent. With current or near-current levels of technology, humanity could feasibly colonize the galaxy over the course of a few million years. The fact that no one has done so and swung by in a spaceship indicates that there are probably one or more great filters that exterminate intelligent life at around the period they can start colonizing other planets and systems. Taken all together, it probably means humanity is dangerously close to a great filter and might be nearer the end of our species than we might think. Either something we invent in the near future backfires, or some event we already unleashed is an extinction level event and we haven't realized it yet, like plastics, climate change, nuclear weapons, etc. Story 39. Information scientist here. Our entire digital world is taped together with what was on hand at the time of development. Half of the software out there consists of cheap, quick hacks, especially because there's never enough time or money to do things right. And even if you do, it's outdated next year or some API you rely on screws up. Everything could come crashing down any minute now when some crappy server from the 90s in some telecom data center blows a fuse, or some teenager figures out how to hack a server that everybody forgot but turns out to provide a tiny bit of functionality to something else that provides functionality to yet another thing, and so on. The more you learn about web technology, the more you want to rip your hair out, move your loved ones into a bunker, and just wait for the end. Yet it keeps going, apparently through sheer stubborn willpower of the human collective and the endless hours of engineers that just keep adding more tape and strings. Story 40. Rejection dysphoria causes heart disease, depression, metabolic disorders, cognitive impairment, obsessive thought patterns, immunological dysfunction, and likely all forms of hostility and susceptibility to brainwashing. Loneliness is what we call it when we become chronically overcome. It is arguably the fastest acting psychoneurological trauma a person can experience, as well as with all other primates, as the effect occurs instantly upon receipt of most any related suggestion when one is vulnerable and will last until treated by contradictory messages and emotional support, which, for many, never arrive. And we all know people who do this to other people for entertainment. Our society encourages it in order to sort the haves from the have-nots. As a cruel joke, the haves resort to toxic positivity in order to reinforce the misuse on the outsiders. But the scariest thing is, like you said, the general public is generally clueless that it's happening and therefore virtually nobody gets treated for it because the victims rarely understand what is happening to them or what to do about it. Story 41. Asteroids are a real threat to civilization and the survival of our species. We have virtually no means of redirecting or preventing an asteroid impact, and there are thousands of big ones floating around near Earth. For a variety of reasons, space is big, these things are relatively small, the sun blocks us from seeing lots of them, etc. We can't even track them all down, making matters worse because physics is super freaking complicated and we're basically just monkeys with computers. We can only project the course of the ones we know about for roughly 100 years. Furthermore, though we have a pretty good handle on where all the extinction-level event-sized asteroids are gonna be for the next century, there are lots of much smaller ones that we don't know about floating around that could just abruptly smash a city or a small country. We are powerless to do anything about it at this stage in our technological development. Fingers crossed we make it long enough to develop countermeasures because getting hit with a big one is pretty much inevitable. Story 42. While we employ techniques along with some physical tools to decrease incidents, we currently have no standardized, reliable monitor to detect or prevent intraoperative awareness, consciousness during surgery, and explicit memory or recall of surgical events. This likely represents our poor understanding of consciousness itself, although we do have some basic models of how anesthetic gases work in our brains, and in clinical data that helps us determine when an anesthetized patient might be at higher risk, certain procedures, and clinical scenarios. We aren't completely in the dark. This is an important area of research and wide in scope within anesthesia, and although the incidence is reported to be as low as 1 in 1,000 general anesthetics, it can be emotionally devastating for patients to experience. This is why we always remain vigilant during our procedures. To be precise, this is not the same phenomenon of consciousness during procedures requiring only sedation. It is not uncommon to wake up or be partially conscious for many procedures, such as a colonoscopy. We tend to err on the side of giving less since every medicine we administer, and basically every medicine in existence, has dose-dependent side effects that may be more detrimental than simply being slightly awake. Cheers. Story 43. That C. diff, Clostridioides difficile infection in the colon is usually contracted by patients while in the hospital for something else, and that doctors and nurses unwittingly track the bacterium from room to room on the soles of their shoes. After visiting the hospital, it's a good idea to change your shoes before getting into your car or slip on a shoe covering. Definitely take your shoes off before entering your home and disinfect the soles. C. diff is very difficult to end, and afterwards it's hard to reestablish good gut bacteria. The alternative, and in my honest opinion, better treatment than high doses of antibiotics, is a transplant from a relative or bank. In most cases, a transplant will get rid of C. diff overgrowth and help rapidly reestablish the biome to pre-C. diff levels. Story 44. Most of our electronic recyclables are sent overseas to poorer countries, Africa, India, etc., where they are improperly recycled and the valuable material stripped. The workers there are uneducated and don't have proper PPE, resulting in exposure to many nasty chemicals. Their disposal of waste from these processes are even worse, leaving the areas around the makeshift recycling plants completely contaminated. It's a shame more coordinated and technologically advanced communities won't set up proper recycling plants, but instead find it cheaper to outsource to poorer countries. And electronic waste is being produced and disposed of at an exponential rate since things are becoming more and more obsolete as technology advances, so this is a problem that will only get worse as of now. Story 45. The greatest global health threat, according to the World Health Organization, is antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. We are expected to face full resistance within 30 years. That means superbugs will proliferate, and the modern inventions, such as surgery, could be dangerous if there's a post-surgical infection. Fun times ahead. By 2050, 10 million people will pass away annually from microbes we previously had treatment for. Currently, 700,000 already passed away annually because of mounting AMR. If you thought the lockdown was crazy, imagine how people will react when scientists discover new treatments to replace antibiotics in the current global race to find alternative treatments to infection. Science deniers will be the biggest obstacle even when scientists find sustainable cures. And if you learned a thing or two from this video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. And if you like these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.